Welcome to Ras Temari Radio. Events Necessary, where we discuss everything but politics. We're here with a good friend. My name is Zodi. We're here with a good friend, Danny.
Hi.
Danny, thanks for coming on. Danny is American, from New York.
Yeah.
Danny, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in Ethiopia and what your connection is, what your interests are, background, that kind of thing, please.
I'm a lecturer at Addis Ababa University in the journalism school. I started teaching there in 2019. But I also have an Ethiopian uncle. So I first came here when I was 5. Should I make it like this? I used to work in sound, by the way.
Thanks, yeah.
This is on axis.
Somewhat
on
directional,
axis.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Cardio. Is cardio?
Right. I think we can all hear, but yeah.
Welcome to Ras Temari.
We can all hear, but we can't all see. Our audience can't see you, so for those who might be surprised, Danny is, how do I put this? A white person.
I'm whitey.
Is
I'm whitey, and I'm yeah.
So when you say you have an Ethiopian uncle, people
yeah.
might be a little surprised. But
right.
So please.
People are surprised because they look at me and they're like, but you're not.
Right.
So I'm a white Jewish person from New York. My mother's Jewish, which makes me Jewish. Her sister is also a Jewish woman. She married an Ethiopian man. Mm-hmm. And he became like vice minister. He was one of the Marxist students.
Right.
He actually became radicalized at Brandeis, which is it's a famous university, famous for its Jewish connections
in the United States.
In the United States, Louis Brandeis was the first Jewish Supreme Court justice.
Mm-hmm.
And so a bunch of Ethiopian students, I think they got a scholarship from Haile Selassie. They came to Brandeis,
mm-hmm.
and then they became radicalized in this class taught by Herbert Marcuse.
Marcuse, yeah.
Marcuse,
who was
right.
the for those who don't know, Herbert Marcuse, one of the major figures in the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, foundational person in the New Left, who really kind of signaled, like bringing more identitarian left, and kind of abandoning the traditional working class, among other ideas. But so this person studied under Marcuse. Marcuse.
Yeah, my uncle studied under him, and also Angela Davis was his, or he was her mentor.
Mm-hmm.
So they were all at school at Brandeis together. I think that's how he kind of became a Marxist. I mean, it was the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Like
and for those who don't know, Angela Davis, very prominent female figure at that of the Black Panthers and the Black Nationals.
Yeah, she was all with the Black Panthers. I think one time she hid a pistol in her afro.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, and she's very like, she's very respected.
Yeah.
Now you see her like at Shifta, they have her on the wall.
Right.
And like over the last year or so, it's been kind of cool in America.
Mm-hmm.
So I was teaching here for a year. Then I went back to America during the pandemic, which obviously is still going on. Pardon me.
Mm-hmm.
And then you started seeing pictures of Angela Davis like drawn everywhere because of the Black Lives Matter thing.
Right.
So people are kind of rediscovering her.
Right, Angela Davis, along with Huey and Alex Cleaver, Bobby Seale, so these prominent sort of Black nationalist, Black Panther figures from the 70s. So Marcuse, Angela Davis, all these people were kind of hanging out in Brandeis, and this is where your So how does this relate back to your uncle and
yeah? So like I
aunt?
guess. My aunt, uncle, and my cousins, who are half Ethiopian, half Jewish, white,
mm-hmm.
they are like my closest family.
Mm-hmm.
We like grew up. I think after 91, we all like lived in the same. We like, because they came here. Came
mm-hmm.
to America. So that was like my closest family growing up.
Right.
Yeah.
And so mostly this is in the States, though.
Yeah, I came here once when I was 5 for my cousin's bat mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is the first bat mitzvah is for a girl. Bar mitzvah is for a boy. So the Yemeni Jews here, they always had bar mitzvahs, but they didn't allow a girl to get a bat mitzvah. Mm-hmm. So my cousin was the first bat mitzvah, I believe, in Addis Ababa.
Right.
So I'm getting like sun on my leg.
For people who don't know, because there isn't that large of a Jewish community. I think everybody in the States knows, especially around New York, right? But like bar mitzvahs, these are sort of like these very significant sort of people coming of age.
Rite of passage.
Rite of passage, yeah. Right? Usually around early teenage years, 12, 13, around the completion of puberty, and it's often a major thing. People spend more money on bar mitzvahs. Some people than
Did you have one?
on weddings. No, I'm not Jewish. I'm honorary, but no.
So this is what we were joking about before the show. Is I believe Zaudi is like the most Jewish person in Addis Ababa.
And I believe that's almost the nicest compliment.
Well, it's also a knock too, because you're prickly.
Thank you.
But I'm prickly too.
Right.
So our little exchange was a very
just Jewishness, right? This is also the New Yorker with their constant aggression with the subway and the having to deal
but you got to know when to say when.
Right. But the people who, compared to Ethiopians and compared to Africans who tend to be more laid back people, but
and also non-confrontational.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry for making you uncomfortable.
Passive aggressive, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't like passive aggressive. I feel like it doesn't solve anything.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's usually to deflect. But see, okay, so these are some of these cultural rifts or these personality rifts, generational rifts that we
but like when I see you in Addis, I'm like, this guy just got a bagel somewhere. Or he just got off the...
See, we might even have to contextualize bagels, just like we did Angela Davis.
No,
just like
they know what a bagel is. Come on, they know what a bagel is.
Or just like we had to do bar mitzvahs. Bagels are very much a New York thing. There was one place, and it's, where all these really interesting restaurants are, which also happens to be some of the most crime-infested areas, like around the behind Bole High School. There's a place called Bagel Corner. It's still called Bagel Corner, but I don't think they sell bagels anymore.
I think I've seen that.
Yeah. No, at first they were doing all kinds of intricate, bagels, bagel burger, bagel this, bagel that.
Apparently.
And then I think now they're just kind of another. So bagels have not come in large numbers to Addis, but there are people who are.
I would love a bagel.
Oh yeah, there's bagels when done right. Bagels, pretzels.
Oh, pardon me. Sorry.
Obviously, hot dogs and some of the other typical New York foods. Right? But all this is to say that you have this special connection from childhood to Ethiopia.
Yeah. I was like a confused white person growing up because my closest family are like Ethiopian. So like like a child doesn't know what race is. They just know like that's mom and dad and that's cousin. I don't want to say my.
And that it's silly. We all as kids were like, this is pointless. Why would you judge anybody?
I remember like learning that we're different races and being like, wait, what? Because how
doesn't make sense. Right?
But how could they? Because we're the same.
Yeah.
And we do things like we talk the same and like we lose our. We joke about this. My middle name is Hafkin. My aunt's name is Nancy Hafkin. It's a very Jewish name. And we always joke that we have this Hafkin gene where we like lose we're always bumping into. We're very clumsy. Always losing things.
Right.
So, but they're Ethiopian. They're half, and I'm white. They also used to make fun of me for always getting sunburned because we would always go on like fishing trips or, and I would always be wearing sunscreen. They would be making fun of me for getting.
Right.
So, I was a confused boy.
And so you came here in recent years as an adult. And
right. Okay, right. So, right. I came here in 2018 for the first time as an adult. This was after doing a short stint at Reuters in Jerusalem. And then I like had to leave the Middle East. I'll tell you about that on another show. But I was like looking for a new beat as a reporter.
So most of your background is in journalism, but you have some connections.
Documentary film and TV, and journalism. I have a master's in journalism. Salman Rushdie was my teacher.
Really? Where was that? This is something I did not know about.
At NYU,
At NYU? Salman Rushdie taught at NYU?
He did. I was in his
I've seen him
seminar
speak a couple
class.
Times, but I didn't know he actually.
He has great witty barbs. Like if he was on this show, he would have like the funniest.
See, I've seen him on other talk shows.
Yeah, like he knows exactly how to have like that short witty thing that's kind of like
a punchline.
A punchline, It's British style. Very cool guy.
So he's Indo-Pakistani British and now American. So people don't know, Salman Rushdie is one of the great literary writers, high-minded literary writers of our. Well, okay, he's considered possibly. You're not a fan of his work, even though you were one of his students. But no, but in the 20th century, right? His most famous novels include Midnight's Children, which is about India, and Satanic Verses, which got him in a lot of trouble
with the Ayatollah.
Right. So he writes a book, which I actually think is a good book. As a book, right? Yeah, love that. I've read a bunch of stuff, but like Satanic Verses is about Islam and he's interested in magical realism and film and sort of modernity and his stuff is complicated, but he does this whole thing where he names a haram after the women in the haram, or sex workers essentially after
Is that how you say that?
I believe so.
I've always said harem, but it's probably right.
Okay. I don't know. It's not my first language, or really any of my language. But so
HAREM. You mean the
yeah. So he names them after Muhammad's wives, and this is seen as purposeful provocation. The Ayatollah of Iran puts a fatwa on his head. A couple people involved in the publication of the book have been killed. There's that. So perverse sense of humor. So Salman Rushdie now always travels with bodyguards, and this was a big event.
In the one time they raised the bounty on his head.
Right.
It was in the news, and then like that day they had to move the class to another room.
While you were his
yeah,
teacher.
so he came in.
He's a student. Right?
Yeah, I was a student, and he came in and he like joked about it. He's like, "Listen, we moved the room. It has nothing to do with." But I'm sure you read the news. They raised the bounty on me. But then he makes like a joke about it. He's like, but
I'm sure you read the news. They made a bounty.
They raised the bounty on me like by $1 million.
Right.
And then he's like, so I'm sure you read the news about the bounty.
Yeah.
But here's what he says. He says, if any of you guys are strapped for cash, and then he like points to himself.
Like you just put a bullet in my head and be done with it.
It's funny.
We'll have mortgage money for years.
I had him do a voiceover for this for my master's thesis. Because I did my master's thesis about the Sufi Muslim Brotherhood in Senegal. Well, they're based in Senegal, but they're like all over the world.
Muridiya, yeah.
The Murid, you know. Sheikh Ahmed Bamba, of course.
Yeah.
So I had him read this poem that he loves called "The Conference of the Birds," which is a Sufi poem. Mm-hmm. But when I came to like knock on his door, like for his office, to ask him to do it. And when I knocked on his door, he's like, ah!
Right.
This was right after
he's
the bounty.
chompy. Right.
Yeah, he's like...
And you also knew Mamadou Diouf, who was my advisor.
Yeah!
Mamadou Diouf was a very, very well-established professor of history.
Yeah.
Was written quite a bit about the Muridiya, Sheikh Ahmed Bamba, the Sufi poets, their conceptions of time and the arts of citizenship, especially in urban areas. And
didn't you live in Senegal?
I did. I lived there for like 7 years. Yes. So
right.
I didn't know Mamadou at the time, but years later.
Yeah, I went on the Mogul. They have their own Hajj. You know this, right?
No, I don't.
Well, that's what Tuba. I mean, Tuba's there all year round. Right. It's like the Vatican City. But what builds Tuba is all the fake sunglasses and fake purses and hats that they sell all over the world.
Sure.
Because they're like the seller for the audience. These are like
these
are the sellers that you see in every European city, in New York, in Asia. Right. They're always selling stuff on the street, and then they have it's on that it's like a cloth that they can turn it into a sack and put it on their bag on their back as soon as a policeman comes. Mm-hmm. So all that money goes to Tuba to build Tuba, and then once a year they all go on a pilgrimage to Tuba, which is kind of like their Hajj.
Okay,
and I did that as part of my master's.
The Hajj being to Mecca. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a parallel with Lalibela, right? And Lalibela was built right around the time during the Crusades when the Holy Land was won over through the Crusades by the Muslims over the Christians, and there's sort of an alternate pilgrimage, right? Because you can't go to Jerusalem
like the
anymore.
New Jerusalem.
Right. It's an underground sort of network of underground churches that are supposed to be generally a replica.
Yeah, why is it under the earth?
That I do not know.
Because I mean that's what really makes it really unique, isn't it?
Right, and that it's all built out of one rock. And so
God, I want to go. I was so close to go. I haven't been to Lalibela.
Yeah, it's quite nice. It's been many years for me too, but it's it is quite impressive.
You know those breakthrough news people? Can we talk about this or not?
Everything but politics. But if you could talk about it without talking about politics,
okay.
Then let's leave it alone for now.
Okay,
we have a million other things to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, they're in Lalibela. They're like the only media in Lalibela because they're very anti-Western news. It's this Lebanese lady, Rania Khalek, and this black guy from D.C., Eugene You know what I'm talking about? So basically, the government because they've been for many months have been countering the Western narrative about Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. To their credit, I think, and they're there right now. Anyway.
So all this is to say, this is your background, right? So you have strong feelings about things politically. You are from New York, from a Jewish background, from a Jewish family. We've talked about Judaism and in other areas, right? Like in terms of comedy, right? It's the great influence that especially northeastern and educated Jewish people in the post-war period have had on American humor, which has since been exported, right? People like Jon Stewart, people like Seinfeld, and
right. Are you asking me why are Jews funny?
I wasn't asking you, but since you brought up, why are Jews funny?
I don't know.
So you were saying that at one point when we were talking about this, that the Jewish male and the sort of the ambivalence, the sort of,
right,
in the way things,
right,
and being perceived as effeminate as a result, or as
effeminate. I don't know about that.
Uncertainty,
yes.
Right.
I think that I have this conversation a lot in Ethiopia for some reason, because people are like, hey, how come Karl Marx is Jewish, Freud is Jewish, Einstein,
These are good questions.
Yeah, like what? Like are they like? Why are they smart?
There aren't that many Jews.
Yeah, there aren't.
It's not just smart, but like breakthrough.
That's the key. That's the key. And I think the reason is, if you look at European history, there was, so basically when the Roman Empire became Christian, they outlawed every religion except for two. One was Christianity, and the other was Judaism, which they allowed. They allowed it kind of to have this scapegoat.
Sure.
Right? Because now the religion is based on a guy who's murdered, who's executed by the state.
Sure.
But if it's the state, you can't have the Romans be the bad guys. That's got to be.
So suddenly the Jews are the ones who killed one of theirs. But when it's crucifixion is a Roman practice.
Yeah, he's murdered by the state. He's like Tupac.
Right. And it's really after, not to get into the whole religious thing, because but it's really after the temple was destroyed in AD 70 that the book of Matthew was written after
the destruction of the second temple.
That has Pontius Pilate, who was the Roman administrator, famously washing his hands, right? And it's basically, that's what they're saying. The Romans didn't do it.
The Romans
didn't
do it.
And
it was
really,
the
in
Jews.
fairness, the Jews blame the Christians blamed the Jews up until the 1960s, up until
the first Christians were Jews. Jesus was Jewish.
Course,
but what they've done, what they've I would say in a very sophisticated way, they realize we're going to outlaw every religion, but we're going to keep these Jews around because they're useful. They're useful as a scapegoat.
An enemy image within the state to sort of maintain social coherence.
Right.
I was going to say, up until Vatican II, when they rewrote the Mass and during the liberal reforms of the Catholic Church, during, I think it was Holy Thursday, during Holy Week, up until Easter, there was a prayer that said, "Let us pray for the treacherous Jews." Right, like literally built in. I don't know if you know this. This is up until
I didn't know that.
Of course, they also did everything in Latin, and the priest had his back to, and they had a altar rail. Things were very different in the Catholic Church. And it's Mel Gibson and his family, these anti-Semitic people, their whole breakaway
from Vatican II
is because of Vatican II.
Right.
It's the leader of their breakaway who said Vatican II is the spirit of the devil, as opposed to the spirit of God. So
right.
Regardless, we're off on a theological tangent, but so there was always this thing with Judaism.
Well, okay. So the reason why I think a lot of breakthroughs are them, Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because in Europe, the Catholic Church for a good 1,000 years is basically telling everyone how to think, and this is the only way how to think.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one other, because Judaism is also a mode of intellectual, it's a way of thinking about the world, and it's particularly a way of thinking about, is it on one hand this, is it on one hand that? There's no pope in Judaism, right? It's a lot of arguing.
Right.
It's a lot of arguing about.
And there is a code of ethics.
There's a code of ethics.
So you do feel guilty, or you are held accountable.
Right.
But it's always up.
But there's so many different interpretations,
right, exactly.
and it's particularly influenced by Persian dualism, which when you see reflected in like the most Jewish sound I could make would be like, which means like on the one hand this. But on the other hand, that that's literally like a rabbi.
And you hear that inflection even in the pronunciation of a lot of words.
So what that means is that they're thinking differently than Christians, because they're allowed to question things, and they're supposed to question things.
This is probably why you have the breakthroughs, right? Like
sure.
Einstein, Marx, and Seinfeld, or another way. People either in media or in science and technology who kind of. What about, we discussed this at one point. And you're going into like literature, right? Famously, the Jewish character in Shakespeare, the most famous one is Shylock the Jew, who was was subjected to all kinds of anti-Semitism, including really from Shakespeare, even in the way that the character is written in the famous play Merchant of Venice.
Merchant of Venice.
Right, and what they tell you in that class when you read this is so Shylock is resented, but his entire source of income is by lending people money on interest to make money off of interest, which they call usury.
Yeah.
Which was illegal
under the Catholic Church.
Which may be why Jewish people got into the finance.
Yeah, well, they also the kings needed financiers,
right,
so there was something called the court Jew in medieval Europe.
Yeah.
So that's useful for them for their financial, for raising money, but it's also useful for when things go wrong. You have someone to blame.
Right. And I think the Jews were expelled from England at one point.
They were.
For a couple hundred years, right? This was, I think, right before Shakespeare's time.
Right.
Medieval period. So all this is to say, right, like these roles that are set up, and we talked about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion even.
Yeah.
Which is the greatest
written by a Jewish guy.
Right.
I want people to know that.
Greatest forgery and most widely read fabrication and conspiracy.
Right.
It's brought back by the dark web now. By a lot of Islamic fundamentalism, but a lot of right-wing sort of neo-Nazi groups. Yeah. It's supposed to be this document where the elders of Zion, the Jewish conspiracy, all met together and laid out their plan for world domination. And
right.
how they're going to take over the world and so on. Of course, none of this is real, but it's read as a real document, especially by people who are interested in this conspiracy of the.
Yeah, and I believe the story behind it is there's like a Jewish guy who wanted to be in some club with some other Jews. This is a very common story, and they wouldn't let him in the club. Mm-hmm. So I've always told you that nobody hates Jewish people more than other Jewish people.
Sure.
It's like a lot of, they'd be like, even especially in academia, like they really, like there's some guy who's like their nemesis every time. There's always like my mother hates Bernie Sanders. Mm. She's like a liberal, but she hates Bernie Sanders because he reminds her of all the Jewish college professors that she had a beef with.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
No, but this is common among other different kind of groups, like for instance, the most repressed homosexuals are often the ones who come out and are like super anti-gay. A lot of these preachers in the South who came out and go, oh my God, gay people gives it. They just so happen to turn out to be gay. There's a whole thing about the self-hating black man or the self-hating. You know what I mean? If you're really conflicted and you're put on the margins of society, often the greatest opposition comes from within those marginalized groups.
We're also just prickly people.
Yeah.
But what was I gonna say? Oh yeah. So anyway, this guy who wrote it, they wouldn't let him in the club. So to get back at them, he went to some publisher and fabricated this Protocols of the Elders of Zion. A Jewish guy wrote it in order to get back at those guys who didn't let him in the club. Right. And then people started thinking it was real. And of course, when people start to think it's real, or when it starts to resurface, usually when there's a Great Depression or financial crisis or some kind of great calamity. This is
like
one of the
Germany after World War I.
Like Germany after World War I, or even now. This is what makes anti-Semitism a bit different than other forms of prejudice. Is that it's a way to scapegoat a people when things go bad,
right? And
say, oh, they're somehow behind these events.
Punching up.
Sure.
Punching up. Barry Fessler is punching up. Usually, racism is looking down on a downtrodden group. Yeah. This is an inferiority complex.
It's like they're somehow behind it, know. And because when people look up, they see Jewish people in these positions of power or wealth
prominently.
They're close to the way I conceive of power is kind of like a mountain, or like mountains. Like the peak of the mountain is the power. And people are trying to, a lot of people who are not at the very top are trying to get close to the top. A lot of time when people look up at the peak, I'm pointing up right now. Pointing up, they're looking up, they're trying to find the power, right? Because they can tell they're being fucked somehow, especially during these times of crisis or calamity or whatever. Mm-hmm. They look up and they say, well, how come there's all these Jewish guys up there? What are they doing up there? Well, the reason they're up there is because they are a minority group who's looking for protection. They're trying to get close to the power for protection. But when people look up, they only see them. They don't see the real power. And, of course, the real power is using them as an intermediary, as someone to blame.
Sure.
Yeah.
Scapegoating does happen in other situations, and it can be often a key to genocide. Another one being new media. New media, this is the Holocaust happened. There's also the advent of cinema. And if you've never seen motion pictures, cinema comes before TV. If you have never seen motion pictures as an audience, and you walk in and you see a giant screen of motion pictures, you're probably susceptible to anything that it tells you because it's magic.
Sure.
They call it Seit Anbit in Ethiopia, the first cinema.
The House of the Devil.
House of the Devil, right?
Yeah,
Because
I've seen that.
you see moving images. It's like, okay, this is either magic or this is devil. That's one of the things Salman Rushdie talks about.
Right.
It's like the film actors in Bollywood in his writing are he literally parallels them with the gods, right?
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, that's the deceptive Jew.
You know about Birth of a Nation, right?
Yeah, exactly. One of the earliest film. Tell us about Birth of a Nation.
Well, so I show it in my class at Asab University. Mm-hmm. It's one of the first. I mean, like movies before this movie were like novelty projects. They were like cartoons or something. This movie was like the first real movie. So it would be like
first serious film.
Yeah, it would be like if someone released like a 7-hour IMAX movie now.
Yeah. That
like blows people away with its editing
or
devices.
TikTok video or something like that.
Something totally new.
Yeah, we look at all these social media platforms as this is just people goofing on. Imagine if somebody did like a really impressive piece of TikTok art and it just kind of blew people away. Right?
But it's blowing them away with the content of the movie is that the Ku Klux Klan are the good guys after the Civil War, and the bad guys are the black men who are basically like rapists preying on white women. And they're really like, white guys in black makeup. I show this to my students and they're like, what the fuck? This is great. Sorry, can I swear?
No, it's okay.
And so people when they watched this movie, a guy, like this is a true story, a guy pulled out his gun and shot at the screen.
Are you one of your students?
No, not in my class.
Oh, okay. in real life.
In 1917 or whatever, yeah. And this also sparked the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, which had basically been like an anachronism, like some
recruitment video for them.
Basically, yeah.
While also being one of the first, if not the first, truly artistic. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, new media like that, like overwhelming.
Dude, media
can really.
When you mix media and ethnicity, I know we're not supposed to talk about it,
that's okay.
But here's the other thing I tell my students: media is like a knife. You can use it to make someone dinner, or you could use it to slit someone's throat. It's a weapon. I mean, it can be used as a weapon. Right. And when you combine it with, you're seeing this now with social media, right? When you combine it with ethnicity or whatever, I mean, you gotta. I mean, to me, this is why like Facebook is actually like evil. But this also goes back to medieval Europe, by the way, because every time a printing press would show up, this is before protocols, but of course there were other anti-Semitic screeds. Every time a printing press would show up in a European town, there would be a huge pogrom against the Jews like within a year. They would be like kicked out. See how media
see what I mean? Even the printing press, that's so interesting. Because I was going to say in a positive spin, if we could put a positive spin, get back to comedy. Why are Jews funny, right? This whole Jews control the media. Well, comedy, I mean, something like Seinfeld, which was a breakthrough. We came up in New York in the 90s, in the late 80s, early 90s. Seinfeld was completely different kind of situation comedy. Much more intelligent, much more off the beaten path.
Yeah, like compared to like Friends or something.
Absolutely. And Friends comes a little later, but yeah, even Friends, the quality parts of Friends are very Seinfeld influenced. Like, it was, I mean, but everything was tried and true at the time, and then now suddenly somebody's making jokes about very relatable but very intelligent kind of stuff that kind of relate to that Jewish kind of New Yorker.
Yeah.
You would agree with that?
Well, I think it's the thinking about things differently thing, and it's also the extreme anxiety and suffering.
Yeah.
You don't get funny without pain.
Right. Not real. I mean,
yeah. Have you ever met a guy like with no problems? Like he's not funny.
He's not funny. Yeah. Mel Brooks said that once, the difference between a German joke and a Jew joke, and why Germans aren't funny. Because German jokes are pointed at somebody else, and Jew jokes is self-deprecating. And so I'm the butt of my own joke. Which is, people only laugh. This is also why there are no good conservative comedians in America, because conservatives are snide and smarky and not always, but you know what I mean? There's a reason that most of the really funny comedians in America...
They're not self-deprecating.
Yeah, but they're
really
truthful. They're truthful, liberal comedians, the George Carlins, the Jon Stewarts, and also they're empathetic.
Right.
Artists are empathetic. They have empathy. Conservatism is very unempathetic. It's I'm the victim.
They can be funny, but it's always like mean funny.
Mean funny, and after a while, it's just like, no, this is just, I'm not. You watch Fox News. It's not just that it's misinformed and it's right wing. It's also really obnoxious, and their attempts at humor are always very snarky and very like a German joke. Well, Mel Brooks would call it German.
I thought Trump was pretty funny.
At times.
But maybe it was just because he was the president. I don't know.
Yeah, it was more like
I'm not a Trump
performance
supporter,
art.
by the way.
Yeah, no, I know that. But it's more like performance art. Like this is the context. Of
Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah.
But he would also say things like that nobody... Okay, one time it was in the Republican debates. And everyone's like... Oh, he was running against Jeb Bush. It was George W. Bush's brother.
Right.
And Jeb says, say what you will about my brother, but he kept us safe.
Yeah.
And Trump goes... He didn't, what are you talking about? 9/11 happened when he was president.
Right.
And like nobody had said that.
A lot of people had that reaction. Like every time George W. Bush would be like, man, yeah, except for that one day. That one day when you were just coming to office and 3,000 Americans were slaughtered.
He was there for 9 months.
Jeb Bush goes, remember the rubble? Remember like George, my brother, standing over there with his microphone? It's like, yeah, the rubble happened because he was on his watch. Like, that is great.
This is a whole rabbit hole. Maybe we should leave for another time.
Possibly. But since we can transition to, because we're talking about everything but politics, but we're really avoiding Ethiopian politics, ethnic politics, sort of the run of the mill kind of, or even the left right stuff. But we could talk about. I mean, you have this interesting idea about the warlords versus the financiers.
Yes,
and I pointed out that Poulantzas has written about this. Nicholas Poulantzas about the contradiction between finance capital and industrial capital.
Yes,
especially when it comes to the price of oil.
I think when I was describing my framework to you, it registered with you because you've read this guy who I've never read.
Yeah.
And you said, because I was talking about there's always and this is a common throughout history. Like if you open a history book about like Japan or Europe, any history book that goes to scale about a civilization will usually talk about two different kinds of elites that are usually at odds with each other. Mm-hmm. One is called the merchants, and the other are called the aristocrats / warlords. Like in Japan, that would be the samurai or something. No, seriously. Yeah. So when I was
old money, new money kind of thing.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah, I mean it has those. I think it registers with people because they register with you because you had read this work about finance capital versus industrial capital. Now these what I call the warlords are really the military industrial complex. So it is industrial capital, but they're military industrial. Mm-hmm. And so when people are asking me about why is America against Ethiopia, the first thing I say is look, America's it's a pretty complicated place, and it's very big, and there's not just one. There's not even one CIA. This is kind of what I'm getting at with the warlords versus the merchants. There's actually a split, I believe, in the national security state between two different locuses of power that have extended into intelligence apparatuses. I call one team A, the other team B, or the merchants versus the warlords / aristocrats, and their interests are. You can see it in the politics, like one side was with Trump and the other one was with Obama.
And sometimes even within a party, I mean, people within an administration.
Sure, you have them duking out.
Right. I'll get a quick parallel is about in the Bush administration, you had the old school defensive realists, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, who were inspired by Thucydides, who were war is about survival, it's a real world out there. And most mainstream Democrats, most mainstream Republicans, most political scientists, academics buy into this very simplistic view of the world where, everything's about strategy and it's immoral. And then you had the neocons, who were very moralistic about this civilizing mission mentality that they got from the Trotskyites. Completely different background within the Bush administration who allied on this war in Iraq project because they both love war, right? So well, they also knew. So there are factions within.
Factions within everything. And I believe that if you trace those factions back, you can see these two interests: the merchant finance and defense. Now, if you look at the Iraq, you're kind of talking about the ideological. Right. Now, as a historical materialist, I believe the ideology comes after their material motivation. Right. So the material motivation, if you actually, cause there's a guy named Greg Palast who found the two different plans in the second Bush administration for what to do with the oil in Iraq. Very different. One was supported by Rumsfeld, who's the warlords, the defense industry. He's been defense secretary twice, by the way.
Once under Ford.
Once under Ford, and
he's the youngest and the oldest.
Youngest and the oldest. Demon. Anyway, so one plan is to drill, baby, drill. And the reason is they want to bring down the price of oil in order to destroy OPEC, and also because if you think about the defense industry, they don't want oil to be high because that runs their machines.
Right. So
I mean, it's kind of about, for oil, it's about use value versus exchange value. Yeah. The defense industry needs this stuff to run their machines, and also if the price of oil goes crazy all over the world, you'll have protests everywhere. That's not good for your risk game. I would say that the defense warlords, aristocrats, they're playing Risk, and the merchants, financiers are playing Monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes these are coordinated. People say, Western capitalist imperialism. Often it is coordinated, especially the British system was very coordinated. Mm-hmm. But what you're seeing now, especially around issues like oil or China or borders, they're
at odds.
They're at odds.
And that plays into the debates over.
Exactly. Think about looking at China from a monopoly standpoint. It's a great way to make money. Cheap labor. They make the trains run on time. Big markets. They actually want to break in. I mean, this is actually why the financiers supported the trade war, is because they were trying to break into the financial sector of China. That's part of also the Biden-Xi deal. Mm-hmm. They see China as a way to make money. But the defense guys are like, what the hell? You guys just took a third world country and I'm saying they're talking to the financiers. This is what Steve Bannon is always talking about. You Wall Street guys and Kissinger, you took this third world country, you made them rich, and now they're powerful enough to threaten us as an empire. So they're looking at it from a risk game perspective. Is this making sense?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so that's how they disagree on China. One of their big disagreements. Second is oil. Financiers would love oil to go up because if oil is more expensive, people need to take loans. Right. People need to, you know what I mean? They make more money.
Exchange value.
Exchange value. Defense industry wants oil to go down, or they want it to stay stable because they need it to run their machines, and also because if oil goes crazy, the world goes crazy. Right. Third thing is borders. Capital loves open borders. This is another thing these conservative guys are always bitching about. Oh, they open borders, open borders. Well, the financiers actually like that because borders they don't want any restrictions on capital. Oh. But the defense guys are like, this is a security problem. We need borders. And also they make money off guarding them.
Sure.
So those are the three things that they really disagree about. And I believe if you look at America, especially American politics, but it actually extends outwards because these two groups use two very rich Middle Eastern sheikdoms as their slush funds. The merchants use Qatar. That's why you always see Britain and the Democrats and Obama, Susan Rice, and they're always more with Qatar. And then the other side, the Trump side, the defense guys are more with the Emirates. And now you're seeing that play out in the Middle East and Africa and all over the world. These two sides with these two slush funds and these two different competing, fundamentally contradictory interests as we reach this new world of scarcity of oil and like that. Does it make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. And it's backed by people like Polancis and all that. Now, this is your perspective. We welcome everybody's perspective on here. We're not endorsing wholeheartedly any particular one theory over any others, but it is provocative.
Now, here's what I want to. I'm going to just say one thing without diving deep into it.
Go ahead.
There's a big energy crisis happening in the world right now about peak oil.
Mm-hmm.
We've run out of oil. I don't know if you remember in November. There's a lot of things happening here, obviously, but in November there's this huge energy crisis in Europe and all over the world. Oil's going up. It's going up because of rising demand, shrinking supply, and Biden and China, America, China, and India, they all released their strategic petroleum reserve in the third week of November to try and bring the price down. If you release the oil, more supply, it's supposed to bring the price down. Instead, the price went up because everyone went, oh shit, there really is no more oil. The price kept going up, and then a few days later, Omicron, price dropped 10% in one day. Just putting that out there.
Okay, so we obviously again we welcome everybody's.
Maybe this segs into the Habashais a bit.
Right. So this is actually the next point I wanted to get to, which is, now with social media, with the different people's theories about the virus, people are challenging authority, people are challenging expertise, for better or for worse. People started thinking for themselves. It makes it difficult to coordinate responses on healthcare crises and all that, but it also, I think, to some extent, it can be healthy to have a suspicion. Now, in America, generally speaking, and again, New York, the sort of the educated and Jewish and humor, the kind of stuff that we were talking about before, is a bit exceptional, right? And most people in America's lives are very structured along the lines of everybody goes to the same store, everybody goes to the same school, everybody worships the same leaders and the same ruler.
I don't know. I would say that there's I know. Well, one, America's changing. Two is there's more New Yorks now. Like Milwaukee, every middle city is like
It's now emerging.
It's
as
like
New
a
York.
hipster
Yeah,
town
yeah,
now.
yeah.
There's like
This is true. This is a new.
Yeah.
But see, this is what I mean. Like
so
there
there's really
are
like
changes.
two cultures. There's
Right.
like the Biden culture and the Trump culture, and of course behind them are the two teams. You see what I'm saying?
Right. But
And what sucks about America is those are your only options.
Right, and a lot of voters in America, the middle America, are supporting Trump, even though he comes from
Sure.
a completely different cultural background. Right, like they have no connection to that New York upper class. But I suppose that
But neither does Trump in a way.
Right, but
Yeah.
I mean they're in a position to more like sort of mythologize it or glamorize it in their minds. Like, oh my God, this guy's such a great businessman.
You know what
He's-
Fran
he's
Lebowitz
fancy.
said is a poor person's idea of a rich person.
Right. That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
You know, the
Everything is
gold and
very
the brass.
kitschy.
It's very classy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, rich people don't really behave the way Trump.
They don't.
Nor did Trump before he became more of a. Well, first it was The Apprentice, and then when he got political. I mean, before that, if you look at images from Trump, and the Trump that I remember when I was a kid, he was already a major figure.
Sure.
He's full of it. He's full of himself.
Yeah, he was just kind of an
But-
asshole, but he wasn't like a crazy
he was very
clown.
soft-spoken. He was very soft-spoken.
Yeah.
He had that whole
Well,
like rich guy, like you know what I
Yeah.
mean, like you know what I mean, like he loved attention, but he was not this.
He wasn't
this,
a
this
clown.
firebrand guy. You know,
Yeah.
that's a complete change in his personality.
Yeah.
So which one is the real one? We don't really know.
Well, that's a deeper question. Who's the real Zaudi?
Who are any of us? Right?
You ever read Fernando Pessoa?
No, I don't.
My favorite.
Tell us.
He's a Portuguese writer, poet. He's like the national literary hero of Portugal.
Uh-huh.
And he has this incredible book. I take it with me everywhere I go, called The Book of Disquiet. And one reason I like it is because I'm ADD, and it's written in these little, what do you call them? Vignettes and fragments. Yeah. And one of the main ideas of it is who am I? Who are we? Like, it's
So what we were talking about with we were going to get into Abishai's. This is your theory about Abishai's. Americans generally, even though we agree that things are changing now, that people are much more unwilling to fall in line with authority and all that. Americans generally have a culture of everybody kind of falls in line. Everybody kind of follows the same kind of mentality.
Well,
and then
Halberstam
Abishai's
said-
are much more suspicious, is what you were saying about Abishai's.
Yeah, I would say Americans are becoming more suspicious. There's always been, I think Halberstam called this what do you call it? Something, conspiracy. He said there's a long tradition of conspiracy theory in American culture.
Sure.
But I would say that it's pretty dumb.
It's gotta be, yeah.
It's pretty dumb. Like
It's got to be.
Like America's just baseline dumb. Now, what you had in the last 5 years are the two cultures, right? The Biden people and the Trump people. They both subscribed to conspiracy theories, which had bits of truth in them. The liberal people thought that Trump was installed by Russia, which has a little bit of truth to it because this team I'm talking about that Trump's with is actually kind of close to Russia. Yeah. The Trump people started believing in this QAnon thing, which the kernel of truth there was the Jeffrey Epstein thing.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So but everyone,
very small kernel, given how
very small.
crazy some of the. I mean,
Yeah.
like at some point it was. I never really paid attention to QAnon, but like, lasers from Mars and that Marjorie Taylor Greene woman or
holograms and
I like this stuff about Hillary Clinton running like a sex shop under a pizza shop,
pizza place, and the guy showed up. But
sure,
there was
the
Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine, who's on trial by the way
right
now. That's a real thing.
Well, the Epstein thing does seem.
Well, you know what it is those defense guys used Epstein in order to entrap the financiers. Sure. I mean, it's a giant honeypot harem, basically, which is, they've invited them to these weird sex parties, and then there's tape recorders and cameras everywhere. Now they have dirt on everybody. Right. So
which makes sense. I mean,
it's like nothing new here.
The problem with the conspiracy, the Alex Jones types people, first of all, saying really horrible things about the Sandy Hook, but like. The problem is when everything is conspiracy, and they're making humanoids and it's all disjointed. Yeah, you sound crazy, you sound paranoid, and that allows the people on the other side, like the people who are like sheep, who like to be suburbanite sheep who just want to follow whatever their leaders.
But they all believe the Russiagate thing,
right? Well, now, but you see, I remember growing up like at a time when like most suburbanites is like, what do you mean conspiracy theory? It's like I'm sorry. Do you really believe that everything is out in the open?
Right.
You really think
this
that
is new.
people in
it
positions
is somewhat new.
and especially since they do believe in conspiracies. They do believe like a conspiracy just means like more than one person coming up with an idea to a plot or something like that. Like gangs have conspiracies, but not anyone in power. Anyone in
this
power.
Is
they tell us the truth.
That who's this guy? This very left guy. He said, whenever you ascribe intent to a group, when people say, okay, the farmers are on strike, that's fine. But when you ascribe intent to people at the top,
you're a
conspiracy
theorist, and
right?
people roll their eyes,
right.
And it's like it must be nice. It must be like if I have to pick one, I'll go with the Alex Jones with the paranoid conspiracy theorists over the because at least that is and even I mean you have in a much more reasonable way. You have some of this in you, and I prefer that whether I agree with you or not. Or we can talk about it, but like at least the kernel at the core of it is a healthy suspicion. It's a healthy,
especially the federal government,
right? Of any.
But now they're probably using him.
But sometimes it goes too far. Rather than the sheep is just like a very unhealthy. Very unhealthy way of just falling in line.
And people are becoming less sheep. I think that there was an intent to keep people as dumb as possible. Mm-hmm. I call 2004, 2005 when I graduated high school, peak dumb. Right. As in the dumbest time in world human history, right. When
people just
America,
anything,
when the Family Guy was the top show on TV, 50 Cent had 5 #1 singles, more than anyone since the Beatles.
I think 50 Cent is a really, really smart guy. His music is dumb.
It's dumb.
His music is
dumb. America was dumb.
Yeah. But his music is dumb.
And then America re-elected Bush after finding out the WMD's thing wasn't real.
And that's the only time that America has given the popular vote of the majority of Americans have voted for a Republican since 1988.
Yeah.
In 33 years, one time they gave it to a conservative. It was after 9/11, right? And everybody was kind of like enjoying being dumb and complacent and conformist.
Yeah, it's
right?
like we got dumber.
That's the one time. Yeah, the 2000. One time in our lifetimes, or basically in our lives, it was in 30-something years, right? Since the fall.
I didn't know that actually.
The one time that the popular vote went to a Republican. Trump never won it. He lost it twice. Bush lost it the other time. That's the other thing. If Bush had lost the popular, like if the election was based on the popular vote, he wouldn't have won in 2004 because he wouldn't have been in a position to get re-elected, right? He wouldn't have been in office in the first place because Al Gore won in 2000,
right, of course, right.
So really, if the elections were based on popular vote, Republicans would never win. Never win.
Basically, yes. Now their whole strategy is about the voter disenfranchisement and whatnot.
Right. Because and Edward Snowden said this, and I think he's like the most powerful conspiracies are in plain view.
Sure.
Right. The takeover of this. Nobody's denying the espionage, the surveillance state. Nobody's denying. And as far as Republicans are open about voter suppression. Sure. They're open about voter ID laws. They're open about trying to get minorities up, and they're open about gerrymandering, which is where they redraw the districts to make sure that they win. And they're open about all these, and they're open about how they need the Electoral College, even though it's highly undemocratic.
Sure.
Which gives more representation to people in rural states.
Sure.
Than in that's built
and
into
even the more rural
laws.
people in those states.
Right. And they're Republicans, right? So basically, Americans can never tell you we have one.
So you basically have to win by like 10 million votes every time.
Because Hillary won by 3 million and she still lost, right? That's not an accident, right?
3 million,
yeah. She won by 3 million votes and still lost the election. It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And it's just anytime an American tells you we believe in democracy, define democracy, because if it's one person, one vote, America has never had democracy because it has an electoral college, right? So these are open kind of conspiracies to maintain some balance of power in the United States, so that Republicans, because the demographic fight, right?
You know what I've noticed?
Brown people who are a larger and larger number are voting Democrat. Go ahead.
Sure. Like whenever I meet an Ethiopian person in America, their dad is always watching C-SPAN. And no Americans watch C-SPAN. They watch CNN. This is what I'm saying about Habesha eyes, right? You're looking like there's something about, can I say your culture?
Go ahead.
Ethiopian culture, which is like wax and gold, right? You're constantly looking for the gold under the what's the real and it's also you're looking for the hidden for what's the real story, with the hidden truth, but also you're looking up at the power. You're watching C-SPAN. You're not watching CNN. You're watching C-SPAN.
I loved C-SPAN in high school, and I was a weirdo for it.
Right.
Like I didn't.
You're not alone. Every old Habesha man is watching C-SPAN.
But it's not just Habeshas, right? Because most people in Europe and in other places, like, they watch American cable news, especially now, and it's just like, this just looks like a video game. It's just
Right,
like
it's a video game.
Most people watch the news. They just watch somebody talking about, like, serious things. And, like, that's.
I'm saying you guys are somehow trained, or the culture or something to look up and look deep.
Let me give you
at
an
the
example
power.
of
That's
C-SPAN.
Habesha eyes to me.
Let me give you an example of C-SPAN. This is so I was kind of nerdy in high school, right? My mom had a friend over. It was a Saturday night. I was bonding with this gentleman, Ethiopian gentleman, in New Jersey. This is about 20 years ago. And we're watching C-SPAN on a Saturday night. They have a comedian on there who's making fun of the audience. He's like, for those of you at home watching C-SPAN, it's Saturday night, guys. Like, come on, Like, go outside, so we know he's making fun of those of us who would sit on a Saturday night watching C-SPAN, but whatever. So we're watching it, and it's Strom Thurmond's 100th birthday. This is right before Strom Thurmond died. And it becomes a huge deal in the mainstream news for the next month. Who the hell was watching it live, though? And Trent Lott from Mississippi, the senator who was the head of the majority
Right.
on the Republican side, makes this comment to be nice to Strom Thurmond. He says, Mississippi, we voted for Strom. For those of people who don't know, Strom Thurmond was a segregationist who ran for president, saying segregation forever.
Segregation
In
forever.
The 1950s or 60s. And so Trent Lott goes, well, back when he ran, we voted for him in Mississippi. We're proud of him. And if the rest of the country had done the same thing, we wouldn't have had all these problems all these years. This is the freaking head of the Senate Republican caucus, and of course he loses his job afterwards, and of course everybody's like, what the hell did he just say? We're watching it with Habesha eyes going, sorry, what did he just say? Like, everybody in the room is just like in the whole, like, oh, let's have a big birthday cake for the 100-year-old segregationist pappy before he dies, and everybody's enjoying the like on a Saturday night. Oh, he's an old man, like, it's kind of cool, he lived to 100. But Trent Lott just drops his bomb and nobody notices because nobody's watching with Habesha eyes. Me and this older guy were watching, like, yeah, this is why we watch C-SPAN.
Who's the older guy?
He's a friend of my mom's.
Ethiopian
Yeah,
guy.
Ethiopian guy. Ethiopian guy.
eyes?
Very smart guy. He was a college professor, right? He just came over and the two of us were hanging out on a Saturday night watching C-SPAN. And then over the course of the next month, everybody, the whole country kind of caught on to how crazy what we just saw was.
Right.
But
you were the first to see it.
Yeah, a prominent Republican, one of the most prominent leaders in the country, basically going, rah, segregation.
Yeah.
If only we had stayed segregated, we wouldn't have had all these problems all these years.
Yeah.
This is one of the most shocking things anybody had heard, right? Of course, this was before Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Now a statement like that would be like,
See, okay,
Tuesday.
So here's what I also think about Habesha eyes. I don't think it's a coincidence that you're the one country that didn't get colonized and also are able to see the world this way. Because colonization happens in your mind.
right.
You know what I mean? It's like a trick.
Could it be the other way around, though, that, like, the reason we have maintained this Habesha is because we weren't colonized and therefore our minds were...
Well, it's a dialectic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely,
But I think,
absolutely.
like, if a white person coming to Ethiopia and are like, I'm better than you, it's not going to
No,
it's
right
not gonna
away.
work.
No,
It's not going to work.
No.
But they did that in everywhere else in Africa, and they were able to I mean, you know what I mean? I mean,
No,
is this wrong to
absolutely.
say?
I think there's something to
I
that.
think that it allows you to, like, see the trick coming,
Yeah.
you know? And also, I think it's, and I was just talking about this with my Venezuelan friend, because I was telling him about the No More thing. I know we're not supposed to do, can I talk about No More or no?
You can. I was actually laughing because I love any sentence that starts with, I was just having this conversation with my Venezuelan friend."
Right. So he hates, like, he fucking hates America.
Right.
I mean, we both grew up in America, but he hates the American government. He's pretty left. By now, he's actually like a communist.
Mhm.
You know, the pandemic had a way of
Right.
like taking people's minds and not in a bad way, like really making people think about what they believe.
I mean, well, Venezuela has been,
Yeah,
very much
so
at
he's
odds
a
with the
he's a
American-
Chavista.
Chavista, okay.
But all of his family, and all of the, what you would call the Venezuelan diaspora, I'm using quotation marks because they would never even call themselves like that. What I'm saying is the Ethiopian and Eritrean diaspora is unique in what they just accomplished, organizing all over the world with
Right.
no mainstream media coverage. And what he said to me is, and there was another Venezuelan guy who also said this at a panel in D.C., is we're jealous. We wish we could be like that because, in fact, the Venezuelan diaspora would be in support of what America's doing. The Venezuelan diaspora is against, like, they're against their own country.
That's very common. Diasporas often are
Right.
oppositional, but a
Right.
lot of people ended up. I mean, look at the Cuban diaspora in Miami.
Cuban and Miami.
Right, they're there because they were expelled for political reasons.
Right,
among
but
others.
and then what I said to him, I said it kind of in a flippant way, but that didn't really make me think. I said, I think that it probably helps to love your country more than you hate poor people. Now I was saying it flippantly, but then he was like, "Yo, that's kind of true," because those people, those Venezuelan diaspora and those Cuban Miami people.
Oh, they look down on it. It's a class thing.
It's a class thing.
Yeah,
They hate that those poor people are getting services.
Right. I used to, my
and I'm entitled to my hacienda or whatever.
Yeah, the Cubans in Miami. I mean, I don't mean to insult all Cubans in Miami, but it is an old trope of like, I'm descended from the kings of Spain, and my aristocratic lineage.
Now,
in
some
Cuba,
people,
landowners,
there are people who have a legitimate right to be. I've talked to like Afro-Cubans who were also expelled by Castro.
Sure. Of course.
But
nobody here is we're not defending, we're not endorsing Castro. But see, this is
I do
that
actually
old American,
sort of like it, but
you know what I mean. Like not necessarily endorsing
Right.
somebody just because we're criticizing their critics.
right. But
Right?
what's like there are a lot of Eritreans who criticize Isaiah's.
Yeah.
But when it comes to American, what I'm doing quotation marks, interference or sanctions on Eritrea,
Sure.
even if they're against Isaiah's, they're still for their country. They're still for Eritrea. They're still for. Same thing with the Ethiopian diaspora. Like even like there's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of disagreement. I'm not going to push too much on that. But when it comes to like is America going to come in and take sides? We just saw they all like joined up, and my Venezuelan friend said, "I wish we could be like that."
Right. No, see, I completely agree. This is one where you're talking about Marxists, we're talking about leftists. I myself
Getting like
don't
this
subscribe.
is like what my cousins used to make fun of me
We
because
can move your mic over to try and
directly in the
sun. We'll wrap up pretty soon anyway, since we've I think exhausted all the topics. But this is one area where I appreciate the Marxist perspective. The leftist perspective is on nationalism, which is generally like upward, like nationalism that criticizes upward, that punches up, and that is liberational, is generally healthy, and Marxism that pushes or nationalism that pushes down with its predatory, like white fascists or white neo-Nazis is generally the worst thing possible, right? Because they generally believe like to rebel is right. That's usually their principle. I agree with that. The only problem is when it comes to something like anti-Semitism. A lot of leftists are very anti-Semitic. And that's because they justified it on that punching up thing.
Yeah.
Like
Also, Israel's actions don't help too much.
That's true. Even Bernie Sanders is, to his credit, come out
Yeah,
and
but
said,
isn't that like
he's not
the
anti-Semitic,
first presidential candidate to say Palestinians are people? Literally, that's what he said.
Yeah.
On a national debate, the Democratic debate, was the Jewish guy.
Yeah. And that's probably why he had that. It's like how Richard Nixon was the guy to open the door to China. Why? Because he had established his anti-communist credentials 20 years earlier with McCarthyism, which he was very involved in.
Right. But
Hunting
see,
down communists.
I also think that ties into the merchants, because you know who was doing that was Kissinger.
Sure.
And Kissinger is, I mean, if you listen to what Steve Bannon is, I'm not saying I endorse what Steve Bannon, I'm saying Steve Bannon is a great way he articulates the ideology of the warlords, which is you financiers, you traitors. Kissinger,
Right.
you betrayed us by making a deal with communist China, and you did it for the money. Which is true.
Of course they did it for the money. Why else
it's also a smart strategy against Russia and whatever.
Sure.
But this is what Steve...
China's a giant market. Well, how long were they supposed to be by principle, Taiwan is the real China? Seriously, you know what I mean? Let's not acknowledge Red China because they're communists when there's
it's kind of a hilarious concept. But by the way, right now I just saw the statistic. So you know that all the semiconductors in the world come from Taiwan. Did you know that?
Yeah. No, but I didn't know all. But yeah.
Basically, because it takes.
I used to cover the semiconductor industry as a journalist. It was my first job
So
my first 9 to 5 job. Yeah.
So apparently, right now, 70% of the GDP of Taiwan is just these 2 semiconductor companies. Sorry, I know it's apropos of nothing, but this is why Taiwan is now going to be the big flashpoint, because it actually has something valuable, which is these chip foundry, and the chips are now scarce. Chips run everything. Well, chips run. See, I noticed because I was working with PR people as a journalist. The Asian companies had a completely different
way of approaching us, which was to just not deal with us. Whereas like Intel and HP, the American way is like, I mean, they would throw presents at us and like set up me like one of the first weeks that I was there, one of the HP people was like, "How about I arrange a meeting with you with the vice president for reseller?" Right? And it was, I didn't even have to do anything, right? Like they come to you and they want the media to love them. They want Americans are very big on what do people think of you, they want people to love them and so on. Whereas the Asian approach was different. And then another thing that was happening that was interesting at the time was there was this rise of this company called ARM, ARM Holdings, in Britain. I believe they were in Oxford, right? So like an intellectual capital. They had gotten into Apple and they had kind of beaten Intel and beaten a lot of these other chip companies. They didn't actually manufacture chips. They had the chip design, patented these designs, and they gave it to Apple for Apple to go through their supply line or whatever. It's a completely different model. Really, really disruptive to companies like Intel, who then went and bought McAfee and got into tried to get into all kinds of other areas because they were like, oh my God, what we're really worried about is not NVIDIA, it's not AMD, it's not any of our other. That's within our
NVIDIA.
Yeah, those are the three major chip companies.
Someone once told me to buy NVIDIA stock.
Yeah, it's a good company.
And then they do a lot of exploded the next day.
Yeah,
hey, have you heard about John McAfee? Have you seen the documentary about him?
I know some stuff about him, but I didn't see the
You
documentary.
got it.
Yeah, he's kind of a...
Well, one, he became like a warlord himself in Belize.
Right.
And it is involved in some kind of like... I mean, he had like... Basically like gangsters working... But also... I don't know if I can say this on your show. There's a scatophilic aspect of this movie.
You can say it, but you would have to describe it because I don't think anybody knows what that means.
What is the age group of your
excrement, like fecal matter?
So the people, the listeners are like our age, right?
They like
am I going to be offending someone's grandma?
No, but you're saying they like fecal matter. That's what scatophilic means.
Yes.
Right. So people who enjoy. We don't have to go further into.
So basically, in Belize, he would lay in a the lady would lay in a hammock above him. Have you heard this?
Right. As I said, we don't actually have to get into all the details.
There's a hole in the hammock. He lies under it with his mouth open.
God.
Are you seeing where this is going?
Right. So
that's John McAfee, the antivirus guy.
Our conversation about Judaism, about comedy, about intellect, about international relations.
Now it's gone to.
But Avishai's, in the end, it just ended up being about fetishizing excrement. And that's I think that's how we're going to wrap this up.
There's nowhere to go from this.
Listen, we really have to, I think this kind of goes under the category of one of our themes, which is masmasa. Masmasa being like to pretend, because we talked about this sort of more passive-aggressive cultures versus more direct ones, and we talked a little bit about Habesha eyes and seeing through.
Yeah.
Seeing through
well, maybe it's an adaptation to that passive aggressiveness, which is a kind of a secrecy.
Right, and a little bit of a dialectic between the two, right?
Right, like if he's going to be secret, now I have to see through into the secret.
Whereas Americans are direct to the point of being bland and boring with their cargo shorts, and it's not because people can't afford better clothes. T-shirts, and everybody goes to the same schools and has no aesthetic sensibility. Everybody's out on the highway with their truck and eats like really plain burgers.
That's peaked up.
You know what I mean, though? Like that's that suburbanite American culture is no aestheticism, no.
I just want to say one thing about suburbia before we wrap up. So I was living here for a year, and also I was in the Middle East. And I by the way, I went to jail in Beirut. I don't know if I told
you told me about that, but we don't want to get too
much
into
well,
these
that's
details.
another time.
Right.
Okay, so I've lived in like these so-called like, tense places, right? I went back to America for a year and a half. The 6 months that I spent in suburbia, which I hadn't really lived in because I grew up, I mostly lived in New York.
This was like purgatory when hell was the jail.
What I'm saying is that I've never felt more terrified than living for 6 months in suburban America.
Imagine doing it for 4 years. That was how my high school. That's still like a wasteland.
It like turns you fucking crazy.
Yeah.
It turns you because
everybody lives in their own little
castle.
And watches their television.
And there's no interaction.
And goes to the mall, and you don't know your neighbors.
You don't know your neighbors.
In other cultures, but like in American suburban culture,
isolated.
It's extreme. And everybody's kids are the same. Everybody's got the same freaking kids because they have the same exposure, the same references, the same bland experience of life. So for those who are listening, the U.S. can be a wonderful place, but I think we'll wrap up by being like, there's a reason.
There's a reason I'm here.
There's a reason I'm here.
All right.
So I think we'll conclude on that. Thanks for coming on, Danny. Come on anytime that you would listen.